Good morning, my friends. Welcome to today's training. Today, we are also doing, like the last training, I started a new series called Differentiating You or Discovering the Real You. And I'm also starting another one. This one's called Welcoming You, and this one focuses on helping us receive emotions, receiving ourselves, and our capacities, emotions, wants, likes, dislikes, needs, things like that. Our reactions, those kinds of things. So these two series are going to kind of like bob back and forth based on what I'm inspired and energized to do, because that's following me and doing me my way. So that's what's up and alive in me today. So, if you're new to me, I'm Marshall Burtcher, and I help codependents rediscover their well-being and their happiness. I help them heal the trauma bond and then come to know, love, and live who they are and create happy, sustainable relationships in their lives by healing the trauma bond and coming to know, love, and live who they are. It's a kind of circular there, but yeah, that's what I do. I've been doing this for almost 13 years now, coming up on year 13 this June. So yeah, and I'm a recovered codependent myself, and we work through narcissistic abuse, chronic emotional neglect, and emotionally unavailability, both within myself and in my relationships. So yeah, there we go. So before we get started, I need to share this out to the community. The Thriving Beyond Codependency community is your safe haven here on the internet, where you can connect with other people on the same journey in recovering from narcissistic abuse and emotionally unavailable relationships, reconnecting or connecting to who you are, getting support, tools, and guidance in your journey. The community is highly moderated and regulated. We have very strict rules about how communication functions, who's allowed, and then what gets individuals removed from the community, and we're very strict with that. I don't have a different word for it, but link is above on Facebook, below on YouTube. I'm going to click a button here, and once again, Facebook in its glory changes things. So, boom, there we go. So, good morning. Let me know how you are in the comments below. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments there. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your support. Thank you for contributing to my journey in thriving beyond codependency. So, welcoming you. How to work with grief. So grief, I've got a lot of years with grief personally. That grief started early in life. It started with the loss of feeling like I belonged. So I've never really, and I don't recall a time in which I felt I belonged, but I can recall a time where I grieved not belonging, where I was very sad, very upset, very confused about not belonging, where I didn't fit or understand the social dynamics. I didn't get what other kids were getting. Like they understood things and were doing things that I didn't understand, and then was often taken advantage of because of my naivety and my ignorance. I didn't process reality the way they process reality, so it's kind of a tricky experience. And then like 8 days before my 11th birthday, my mother passed away from cancer, and that's where my real journey with grief started. So the first thing I've discovered over the 33 years of living with that is grief is the unwanted BFF. Hey, Kaya. It's the shadow. You go outside, you got a shadow. You got a shadow in here. You got a shadow wherever you're at. It's a present thing. And I used to hate my grief. I used to push against it. I used to rail against it because the ache, the longing, the unmetness left in those losses are really, really painful. And some of them don't necessarily go away. Sometimes they're persistent. They come in waves, and it really, that depends on the context, what the situation was and what was lost. And I had a lot of shame, I had a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, and a lot of blame around what I felt. I felt shameful for having grief. I was shamed for grieving and having grief. I was guilted for it. I was told I was selfish. I was told I was lacked faith. I lacked faith because I was grieving. I was selfish because I wanted my mother back. I wanted things to be different. I wanted friendships. I wanted to be included. I wanted to feel included and understood and seen and valued. That wasn't happening. And I internalized a sense of shame for having these emotions about these situations, these experiences I'd been enduring. And I internalized that as I shouldn't feel grief. I shouldn't feel the anger of the anger that I feel at the loss I've endured. I shouldn't feel the depression and the emptiness and the collapse that comes with loss. I should be strong. So the reason, these feelings show up inside me, that means I'm broken, I'm flawed. I got to get rid of this because my dad doesn't feel this. My other people aren't apparently feeling this. I shouldn't feel this. I should be faithful, and I should be grateful I had the time with her, and I should be so grateful that God would give me this punishment, this, what do they call it? Should be grateful that God gave me this trial. Because I felt like a punishment too. I felt like maybe I'd earned it in some way, right? And I'd earned the social thing. Like, I wasn't normal like other children. I was weird. So I'd earned that. Well, why? So there was this internalization of hate towards myself that started to split me off more and more from the genuine reality, the genuine sincerity of my grief. The grief, fundamentally, the way I look at grief, is that it's love that has no place to land. It has no place to take harbor and to be met and valued and seen. And that came out of a lot of work. But at this point in time, until I was in my late 20s, I resisted it. I denied my grief. It was the wrong thing to feel. And then when I started seeking relief from my depression and from my anxiety and from my anger and my panic attacks and this internalized shame that was resulting in very toxic behavior, harmful behavior to my family, to my children, to my ex-wife, to friends, started going into this. One of the first things, it was the second topic my mentor brought up to me, and he's like, grief. We're going to talk about grief. And the way he brought it in, it's left an impact. It's shaped my world, and that the way he put it is like, we got to give space. We got to give grief space to breathe, because to live is to grieve. And he painted this picture, this eloquent picture of everything comes in from a lifeless to a life, back to a lifeless. It's the cycle of life, per se. But he's like, all things have their beginning and their end. And in that is the mix of joy and elation and love, celebration and grief, all in the same moment, because we instinctively know about the impermanence of things. And if we allow ourselves to, without judgment, without shame or guilt or blame, allow that space, allow that grief to take up space in its sincerity, it creates a bigger space to receive, to celebrate, to appreciate, to there's a word, to savor the moments, and to allow that moment of life all its glory. And at first, I was like, screw that. Like, that just, why? Why? Because I was in big resistance to loss. And he's like, let that in, because that's normal. It's normal to hate the loss. It's normal to resist it, because it's pain. And that pain is equivalent to the love and connection and importance that person, that place or thing had or has for you. And that is beautiful. We welcome that in because that's the sincerity there. That's how we work with grief. We celebrate it. We honor it. We allow it to speak in behalf of that which is no longer, and give it the respect it deserves. It's a gentle kindness to ourselves. It's a compassion that we exercise in response to loss, to change. Because sometimes it's not just an absolute loss, like someone dies. Sometimes it's just change. Sometimes you realize that you've changed and you can no longer relate to people who you love and care for and care about the same way, and that alters the relationship permanently. And sometimes that leads to a growing apart. But that grief there honors what was, values it. It's in an interesting way a celebration of what was, an appreciation. It's an interesting point of view. So, grief is a lot like a gentle massaging, a gentle caressing of emotion, of the joy and the sadness and the emptiness that lives there. It's not that you as a person are empty. It's that there's a space within you that person, place, or thing occupied that is now empty. It was their home. And that's they vacated the space. They're now gone. And we can hold honor for that space and give it that celebration and respect because of that sincere love, and joy, and appreciation that has no place to land there. Yeah, this is this kindness. And this is how I moved out of it. The first real journey, though, and getting back into connection with my grief and allowing it to breathe, was I had to come to terms with the shame I'd internalized. The shame I'd allowed and had chosen, unconsciously allowed the shame to define me. I believed it, in other words. Shame is something that requires some level of agreement on our part for it to take hold. This is not a blame or a fault statement. I know it can sound that way. What I'm saying is, at some point, I received shaming for what I felt and agreed with it and thus internalized it. Now I can change that agreement and say, well, I disagree with this. So when I encounter a shame within me, I step back and say, do I agree with this shame or not? And then it's like, nope, I don't. This gives me a mental differentiation from the programming. So it's like, well, someone said I should feel shame for that. I don't agree. What do I feel instead? I feel sadness, or I feel anger, I feel indifferent, or whatever shows up. Now, internally, if we're highly identified in with the shame, we need to go through a practice of disidentification with the shame so we can differentiate our identity and our value from the shame. And the shame clearing tool is ideal for that. If you go above on Facebook, below on YouTube, there's a link to a tools library there. Click on that tools library. You can get access right to the shame clearing right there. This is a practice. This is not an event. I practiced a lot of clearing on shame to get to the point where I can differentiate from it very quickly. It also takes a choice to trust that the shame is false and discover what you feel like and what the world's like beyond that. Because we have to reconfigure our orientation to what is true and real. And if we believe that shame is true and real, then we've got to discover and explore the idea that shame is false. It's a lie. And what the world looks like from there, and who you are from that point of view. So that way you discover for yourself that reality rather than taking it on my word or some other person's word. I'm not your authority or guru. You are to discover this reality and truth for yourself. That way it really sticks. That way it's something that matters to you. It's alive in you. And it's not something you've adopted from someone outside of yourself. Because that gets us out of the codependent habit of what's called external orientation, which in this example would be, oh, Marshall says shame's bad, so I think it's bad too. No. Marshall says shame is a false thing or a lie. What do I think? What's my experience? Oh, I don't know. I think it's part of who I am maybe. Okay, well, what would it be like if it weren't? And then start exploring that. And you can use a shame release tool for that. It leads you through that at a somatic level. And then that will impact how you think at the mental level around shame. But that was my first thing, is I had to really liberate myself from the shame. And then I had to liberate myself from the guilt. The guilt is frequently termed as I did something wrong. I broke a rule, that kind of thing. And I had to come back at it the same way. Is this a rule I agree with? Do I agree with this rule anymore, that I should feel guilt for needing my mother or wanting things differently? Do I agree with the rule that to want things differently is selfish? No. Currently I don't. I don't agree with that at all. I have the right to have my needs and wants, and to have my complaints, and to have my frustrations, and to have my disappointments and disagreements. And people get to live with that, just like I get to live with theirs. That's kind of how it goes. So it's when once I liberated from the guilt by giving myself back the authority to determine what I think is right and wrong in certain things, or if I even agree with someone else's rule about how I should feel and behave towards something, then I was able to access the blame. Because the blame really is this displacement of sometimes it's a displacement of responsibility. Sometimes it's a deflection from pain. Sometimes it's anger that's translated towards something or someone else so that we don't have to deal with it. We want something or something outside of us, someone or something outside of us to regulate us, to take care of us. This would be the 2-year-old showing up and saying, "You made me feel this way, I'm mad." And that we all have that. That's actually pretty normal. It's something we have to bring into what's called emotional accountability and go, now I feel this way and I would like some support. I'm hurt. Will you hold space with me? Rather than you did this or displacing your pain onto someone who didn't do anything, was not even there, and hurting them. It's more like, I'm hurt and I'm upset at what I've lost. It's this ownership, this emotional ownership of what is felt. The real, raw, sincere experience. I'm hurt, I'm sad, this is lost. And I'm a little angry. I'm angry at God for it, or I'm angry at this for it, or that, or this person. We're owning it. We're just sharing it. Once I got through those three things and eliminated my resistance to the emotion by practicing accepting that it's okay, which led me to eliminating the shame, guilt, and blame, that's where grief was able to carve out this beautiful space for more. It's a paradoxical thing. We would think that grief would make it more contracted to receive, more limited. But in reality, I've discovered over and over, the more I allow myself to grieve, the more I'm able to receive, the more available I am for connection, for understanding, for presence, for fulfillment, for satisfaction. Because I'm willing to allow things to move in and out. I'm willing to lose. And I know that I'll be okay. Because we are designed for grief. There's an instinct in us that allows us to move through it. As we grow, as children, we matured and as we grew, we discovered loss. And this is our introduction to impermanence. And in that impermanence, we begin to mature into a cooperation with life. That it comes and that it goes. And both are okay. Because one day we will go. Because we've shown up. We're here. We're alive. And one day we will leave. We will die. So we're all in this cycle of change over time. And that allows us to hold space and honor for our own lives. For the joy that we bring into the world, the pain that we've brought into the world and that we've received from it, to the creation that we bring in, to the destruction we bring in, to the creation that's given to us and destruction that we receive, to the whole experience. And this is how we caress the experience, the gentleness and an honor and a celebration and a space for what grief is. Because it's love with no place to land. That's how I work with grief. It's here. It's alive in all of us. It's very valuable to honor and respect it and give it the space it deserves. So, there's also in the library a grief, I think it's a grief release. I don't remember what I called it. But it helps you move into receiving the grief and then discovering what else comes after it. Because that matters. Because that's part of the aliveness. Right now, up here in the States, we're in the springtime. So things are returning to life from the dead of winter. But these are new things, a rejuvenation. It's not like the old leaf on the tree is coming back to life. These are new, unique leaves. So, we move through it. We allow it to grow us. Okay? That's how I work with grief. Grief is sacred. Grief is powerful. Grief matters. So, there you go. I'll leave you guys with that today. Remember that you're worth knowing, loving, and keeping. Go gently with yourself in your journey, and I will see you guys in our next training.